During our Bible month this year, we're looking at the Old Testament book of Isaiah. The book of Isaiah is the first and largest of 16 books in the Old Testament that each bear the name of the prophets who feature in them. The book of Isaiah is 66 chapters long and is often divided into three sections, each containing prophecies that speak directly into three quite separate and distinct periods in Judah's history. My aim in this brief introduction is to map out the three sections and describe the historic context into which they each speak. The first section of the book of Isaiah covers chapters 1 to 39 and is sometimes referred to as First or Proto-Isaiah. This speaks into the period of Judah's history spanning about 53 years from the year King Uzziah of Judah died in 740 BC to the end of the reign of King Hezekiah of Judah around 687 BC. To make sense of this first section of Isaiah, it's important to remember that the ancient nation of Israel existed as a single united kingdom under the reign of only its first three kings, King Saul, King David, and King Solomon. Thereafter, as a result of a royal power struggle basically, the 12 tribes of Israel divided into two separate kingdoms, with the tribes of Judah and Benjamin forming the southern kingdom of Judah, and the other 10 tribes forming the northern kingdom, which somewhat confusingly retained the name Israel. The very opening verses of Isaiah chapter 1 tells us we're about to read a vision of a man called Isaiah, son of Amos, concerning the kingdom of Judah and its capital city, Jerusalem, during the sequential reigns of 4 kings, Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah. This particular period was rather uncomfortable for the southern kingdom of Judah, but it was utterly devastating for the northern kingdom of Israel. The Assyrian Empire was expanding westward from its origins in modern-day northern Iraq towards the Mediterranean Sea. And in about 733 BC, it destroyed Aram, the lands of modern-day Syria. And then around 722 BC, it destroyed the northern kingdom of Israel, which have ever since then been referred to as the lost tribes of Israel. Then finally, 21 years later, in 701 BC, Sennacherib of Assyria subjugated Judah itself by laying siege to the fortified cities, including Jerusalem, and devastating the surrounding countryside. The first 39 chapters of Isaiah contain passages that are written in poetic verse and other passages that are written in regular prose, and these all speak mainly into these 5 decades of Assyrian aggression. The nation of Judah still existed, but they were under pressure from Assyria. The second section of the book of Isaiah covers chapters 40 to 54 and is sometimes referred to as Second or Deutero-Isaiah. This speaks to the period of Judah's history over 100 years after the subjugation of Judah by Sennacherib. By then, the Assyrian Empire had run its course, and the great power in the land was now the Babylonian Empire. In 586 BC, Babylon had captured Jerusalem and carried the leaders of Judah into exile in Babylon. The second section of the book of Isaiah is addressed to the Jewish people in exile, offering them hope of return. It even includes direct references to King Cyrus of Persia, who in 539 BC conquered Babylon, and in the following year decreed that the exiles could return to their homelands. The second section of the book of Isaiah both predicts the imminent fall of Babylon and glorifies in Cyrus himself as the deliverer of the Jewish people. That means we can pretty accurately date this section to somewhere towards 539 BC. The third section of the book of Isaiah covers chapters 56 to 66 and is sometimes referred to as third or trito Isaiah. This last section speaks to the period of Judah's history after the exiles had returned to Jerusalem. That return from exile took generations, with a small number returning immediately in 538 BC to rebuild the temple, a project that they didn't complete until 515 BC. It was another 70 years before Nehemiah returned to rebuild the city walls of Jerusalem. This final section of the book of Isaiah speaks into this difficult and messy time when the people of Judah were experiencing much tension within themselves and much opposition from those around them. When we step back from it all, the book of Isaiah spans around 200 years of history, which is considerably more than the lifetime of one person. Which raises the obvious question, is this really the work of a single prophet, a man called Isaiah? Did Isaiah of Jerusalem, with whom the book opens, foresee future events in such great detail, right down to the name of the ruler of a future empire? Or do we have here the compiled writings of 2 or even 3 prophets who lived in successive periods of Judah's history? This question has been the cause of very many arguments. And sadly, believing in just one Isaiah, who had the gift of prophetic foresight, is still seen as a test of orthodoxy for some. For others, including me, the fact that God could have given Isaiah of Jerusalem the foresight is possible, but does not necessarily mean that that's what God did. Either way, that question really doesn't make a great deal of difference to our understanding of the book, whose message is not dependent on giving any one person supernatural foresight at all. The prophecies contained in the book of Isaiah provide us with powerful insights into some troubling times for the people of Judah, and help us to consider for ourselves in our time, as the people of Judah did in their own time, questions such as, what is God up to when we face times of turmoil or even persecution? Why does God allow such things to happen? And what can we expect from God when that's going on as we look to the future? So I hope you'll join us for our sermon series on Isaiah as we look at these things together.